Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. And welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome back to part 3 of our podcast on high-impact strategies for struggling readers.
Years 3 to 6.
Years 3 to 6.
Yeah, we probably still want to just qualify that we are talking about the upper end of primary years.
And our first podcast was really focused on the reading workshop, which is, in fact, the scientific method of having a learning intention and then having your methodology and then your evaluation of what you're doing and then changing what you do for your next lesson because of what you found out. So it's really having a scientific approach to teaching, as Misty discussed in a previous podcast. We're going on to the second aspect of our strategies based on what we've seen that's worked successfully in classrooms. Sharon.
And the strategies that we've found to be really worth chasing down.
Yeah.
Because of the impact that they do have on our students.
But it's important to get that structure first of your lesson, isn't it? That you've got that structure of a reading workshop, which allows you to then have a framework, I guess, for how you're going to teach in the lesson.
Yeah. But structure alone won't be enough and I think this is a really timely point to take us back to some pretty core philosophy or pedagogy or research that we often reference, and that is Rachel Gabriel and Richard Allington's work on Every Child, Every Day. And we'll provide a link in the show notes to that. And there's also another resource that Richard Allington has written called What Really Matters for Struggling Readers,
which I think looks at about 20 years of research.
Yes. And why I'm talking about these references right now is, yes, we absolutely know that structure, that opportunity for students to be shown what good readers do as they're reading, so through the learning intention and through the modelling, and having that opportunity to practice those things in their reading. What that does rely on, though, are a number of things, one of them being today's topic about helping our children learn to choose texts that they can read with accuracy and understanding. They're key elements. And the other part is that students actually have access, to a good collection of books from which to make those choices. They're pieces that, we really want to talk specifically about those today. It might seem unusual that we go, teaching book selection strategies to students and having them reading just right books. But that's an essential part for struggling readers to be able to grow. So one of the things that Allington has found in his research is that children having access to appropriate books is a teacher's job. Well, not just a teacher's, a school's job. In fact, they found something out quite interesting in that there are some parts of the world where it's the school that takes responsibility for providing huge ranges and collections of books for students, and others where that's really left to the teacher to go and find and access books. But what does that look like if we've got lots of access to books? It looks like a lot of the time that there isn't just a great school library collection, but that there is a good collection in classrooms. Now, that classroom collection might be made of books that belong to that classroom and so are like consumables. But if not that, then if there is a school library, teachers and students working together to create collections for bulk borrow to come back and live in the classroom on a longer term basis, not just a week turnaround, but for 10 weeks or for that term. So by doing that, we then have students surrounded by books. And the fact that they are there, readily accessible within the classroom and with students engaging, doesn't mean they're only engaging with those books, but it does let children have ready access to them. Research has shown that children who are in classrooms where there are books there all the time, so a curated collection or a classroom library, that children in classrooms that have such collections read more.
Because of that access that they've got.
Because of that access and because of a growing community of knowledge around
those books
and that collection. There's different talk that comes with that. So let's just hold this thought for a moment about just this classroom collection as a forerunner. This is part of our checklist, really, to be able to have struggling readers accessing books. We need to have those collections within our classrooms. And we talk about one of the schools that I've just been working with. We have intentionally, they don't have big classroom consumable collections of books, but they do have an extensive school library. And so we've talked about for the students who are the struggling readers, those who are finding book choice difficult, books that they can read with accuracy and comprehension. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But rather than them go browsing in a library, let them do the browsing within their classroom.
And there's big advantages in doing it that way.
Yes.
Yep.
So, one, it's just less choice. And why limit choice?
Because they get lost in a sea of choices, don't they?
Yeah. Because if I haven't, as teacher, built up these book selection strategies, these ways of choosing, what I'm confronted with in a library in that sea of choice is really not knowing where to go. Like, what's a book that's going to be one that I can read with accuracy, that's going to be right for me, and that I'm going to enjoy,
And probably particularly these children are the ones who want to be successful at choosing, but they haven't had a lot of practice at being successful in choosing. Whereas the reader that's, all over reading, they just go into a library, they know where they're going, they get their book. But these guys are a little bit unsure about what to do. They don't have those successful strategies yet.
Yes.
Yet. Mm.
And so actually I'll just give a practical example of something that we did with a school just recently and so this was in a school where there aren't ready-made classroom library collections, but a great school library. And so in working with each of the classes, we went through a little bit of a process. And that was, actually, let me take one step back. A lot of teachers had noticed children weren't choosing books that were right for them.
So not successful in the process yet.
Correct.
Mm.
And of course, it's important to know it doesn't matter how much time children spend reading, as we talked about in the last podcast. It doesn't matter how much time they spend reading if they are not reading a book that they can read. Mm. It doesn't make a difference. it needs to be, Allington talks about, I always talk about 97% accuracy and above. Allington actually says it's 98% accuracy and above.
Well, actually, it makes it worse for them because they're seeing themselves as not successful.
Yeah. So we lose confidence. We don't want to be seen as the child who can't read. And so therefore, how we see that frequently play out is either they don't want to borrow or they're finding a book like somebody else has got that makes it look like, oh, I must be a good reader too, because I've got, a fat book or, the same book as a friend, when in fact what we're not honouring for the child is the very strategies for learning how do good readers go about selecting books.
And they need help with this,
yes,
Sharon.
Yes. So what we did do was go through a little bit of a process in the library for choosing books so that every child was leaving the library with some strategies of what to do. And I am talking about the year 3 to 6s here. Actually, we did take the 2s, year 2s in as well. But the year 1s, I know this podcast isn't addressing that, but I do want to talk about how what we did do there was we limited choice by not taking them to the library to choose, but the teacher set up 6 browsing boxes. So 6 tubs of books in the classroom, and the book selection time came not in the library, but from those browsing boxes. And actually that was such a successful strategy because what it did do was, so the teacher had created these 6 tubs of books based on what she knows about her children as readers, had velcroed their names onto the tubs so that children knew, here's my browsing box. Another child, here's my browsing box that I can look through. So 4 or 5 children per browsing box.
That's clever.
So powerful, because what it then does is lets children collectively sit around a browsing tub. For each box, the first velcroed name was the leader for that day who would collect the box. They would sit with the box to make their choices, talk with each other about what they were choosing, how they were choosing. So now we've got this community of book choosers who are looking through books, making decisions. We heard children say, I've read that book before. Yeah, I think you'd really like that.
Oh, that's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's using the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to the 3s to 6s.
Just before you go on to the 3s and 6s, was it difficult for the teacher to choose what was going in each tub?
Great question. The teacher made some intentional choices. And actually, this is important for everybody.
Yep.
Whether it's
whatever
year level this is. So, because it was year 1s, the first thing she got into those browsing boxes, and this is at the time of the teacher doing this, it's 10 weeks into the school year. So it wasn't the beginning of the school year, 10 weeks in. All the books that she had read aloud to children, she made sure they were appearing in these browsing boxes. So all the picture books that she'd read over the term.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Over the first 10 weeks, they got into those browsing boxes. Then she thought about the kinds of things that...
so if she read a book aloud in term 1...
Yes.
She's got 6 boxes there. She only puts it in one of those boxes.
Yes, because there is only generally one copy of each book in the school library.
She had to choose where it would go.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that these tubs are just exclusively, or these browsing boxes are exclusively just for those students and others can't access it.
Yep.
But it does mean it's just less to be choosing from.
Yeah, yeah. And so
and less overwhelming.
So there's those read aloud she put in there, but what else did she do?
And can I just add too that this idea of having them in the browsing box means it's giving me permission to reread books.
Yes, you don't have to just read it and then leave it. You can go back to it, which is going back to a book is very powerful.
It's the reading and rereading is actually something that is highly valuable and has high impact for struggling readers.
Yep.
The more they can be reading and rereading. So why would we reread? We're not talking about rereading just for, right, you've read it, so, okay, you've got to read it again. We reread it because we choose to, because we love it so much. And think back to any child before they begin school, and as parents, we read to children. They want books again and again and again and again.
I think this was a big leap forward for me when I realised it wasn't going to harder and harder and harder and harder books to become a better reader, although that does happen.
Yes.
Naturally. But what really makes me a better reader is that if I rehearse that same text.
Well, it does a few things. By rehearse, you're meaning...
rereading, I suppose. Yeah.
Right.
But because I love it.
Yeah. But it's in the rereading that we get to a better understanding. We get to a deeper comprehension. We get to a more nuanced way of reading it because we have...
More fluent.
So deeper understanding, better ways we can phrase that reading so that it's not just a blah, 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 blah reading, but an expressive, rich reading of that, because fluency isn't just about an oral fluency, it's an in our head fluency as well. It's about, it lets us do the self-monitoring. Because there is some familiarity to the text, we can check on our own reading and go, oh, I've misread that because that doesn't make sense. And I know, or I've misread a character name because, I know that the character is this. So there are so many benefits to the rereading.
I think someone said once it's like playing a violin and you get better and better each time you
any musician, but it's... If we're loving it so much that we want to reread, so I think that fits very neatly
within this
in book selection strategies.
Yeah.
Because there isn't wrong with a child saying, I want to read that book again.
Done.
Yeah. All right, so what are the other things we did?
We were just back where that teacher was choosing the books to go into those boxes.
Oh, yes. What other things were going into the boxes? So... she was thinking about what did she know about her readers, and so therefore what kinds of text. So she knows the ones who are rollicking along with their reading. Now we're talking about year ones here, but this is any teacher making the choice. It's knowing your readers, and it's saying, okay, I know I've got readers here who really have enjoyed this type of text. So let me put in a whole bunch of fairy tales in there because but let me do that across all of the boxes, not just one browsing box. So let me have a little bit of a range of the different types of books that are going to appear in those boxes. If as teacher I'm taking a bit of a focus on something, like maybe I'm going to do some work on poetry, or maybe I want to have rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E, rhyming text as part of that. Let me make sure that every box has got those types of text in it.
Yep.
Let me make sure I've got some not only fiction but some non-fiction. What about some poetry in there? What about for my struggling readers? What do they need to support them in their growth? So it may be some intentional instructional texts. I don't mean instructional level text, but texts that we might use, whether they're in a particular format or a short text, maybe there is only one line per page because that's what they're dealing with at the moment. But this teacher, very intentional about what will support my struggling readers to be successful, so that when they're in this box, most of what they're picking up, they are looking at and going, I can do things with that. I have entry points into that.
Hi everyone, just a little Teachific promotion here. We've kept our Teachific individual membership price at the same level for quite some time now, but we're announcing an increase in fees on June the 1st this year. However, if you join now, you are future-proofing your membership to stay at $12 a month forever. So become a member now to access all our resources and courses at this amazing locked-in price. Looking forward to you joining. Bye now.
Now, there was an intentional practice that went with that, with the browsing box. For the struggling group, we made sure that if the book wasn't at 97% accuracy for them, that a reading with them of that book would give them that much stronger entry point into it, to know exactly what they could do with this book and what could be done to sustain them through this book. So what strategy or strategies, not too many things, to help them be successful with this text, because these texts that these children are selecting are for their daily independent reading time, where there's that teaching wrapping around it, so that we've got what is it that we're doing with this book and we're up and doing it. So what reading strategy we're employing as we are all engaged in our own reading at our own level. And now those lessons are all totally differentiated for every child, because every child is working with a book that works for them, that they can successfully practice these strategies with.
And I guess the other thing in the mix here is that you could also have a survey or an interview with a child to find out their interests in reading.
Yes. Yep. Now that's something we did with all the year 3 to 6s.
Yep.
In this school, we got them all doing a reading survey.
Right.
And on Teachific, we offer reading surveys for year 3, 4, 5 and 6, so individual ones. Linda Gabriel has her Motivation to Read profile, which we've also given access to on Teachific. So the survey, students are filling out that survey, but as the teacher talks about those things, not just give them the piece of paper, get them to fill out the questions. You want them thinking deeply about what it is that they are, what it is that they know about themselves as readers. And invariably on that survey, one of the questions is, how do you choose books to read?
Yep.
What are your book selection strategies?
Yep.
How do you choose?
So we've really moved back to year 3, 6 now.
Yes, but you know what? Can I just be so indulgent as to say that even in a kindy class in this school, so with the 4-year-olds,
right, they
also have chosen their 3 books for their, let's call it, their independent at school reading time. Beautiful process that the teacher had or set up for her 4-year-olds. So once again, it's 10 weeks into the school year. She set up 3 tables. One table had a lot of, so for every big book that they'd read over the last few weeks, she had the small version copies on this table. So the small versions of big books. Now, if you've got those in your school, get those books out, because that was the intention of the small books going with the big books, was if you're reading that together as a class, then the small books are there for individuals to be reading. So she had one table of a lot of small books matching the big books that they'd been reading.
And I suppose an easy way of doing that, if someone doesn't have these published books in their school, is to have a big version of a poem in a big book that you write out, and then you could have small versions of those poems for the children to read.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, absolutely.
Without having to buy something that's published.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah, correct. But I guess I'm also just saying, just look in your school. Some of these things are lurking in schools and aren't being used.
Yep.
So it's a great way to get them back out in circulation. She had another table that had all these picture books that she'd read over the last, so they were all quite familiar to children. Plus a few other extras, that were slipped in there that she hadn't necessarily read, but she knew the children would be interested in because of things that they'd talked about in the last 10 weeks of school. And then she had a table of label books. So all books that had one picture per page and the corresponding word for that picture on that page. So she just showed one thing from each of the tables to explain what was on those tables, and then she set every child off to go and make a choice from each table. So they had, by the time they'd moved through, and in this instance there were 2 other support teachers in the room, so it meant that a teacher was at each table. So it meant that as children went round, it was just a very quick teacher guide to, choose one book from this table. So they just got that message from each table. Anyway, the end of that, these children came back with their 3 books, came back down to the floor. 20 minutes. 20 minutes went by with these children just sitting and reading their books. 4-year-olds. Like not one child doing any, roll or, what are we doing now? I need a drink. What, when's it home time? When is it this? When is it that? Fully engaged. But it was because with limited choice, they were finding books that they had immediate entry points into.
Yep.
So, this sitting with books, and they were sharing with each other, but mostly it was doing it for themselves. Now, this teacher would say, and this is why I'm just bringing us back to this book selection piece, this was something that she hadn't done it this early in the year and was herself entirely surprised by how successful that was. But the key points that I think we need to take for all of our struggling readers is that when we limit the choice and say, how about we look here? Or how about, I've pulled a few books out because I know you're interested in, or I know, like when teachers can start making some of those choices because they know about those children as readers. So if they're the struggling readers, and we can find out, say through that survey or through an interview with them, to say, what interests you? What do you enjoy? What have you read that you've liked? That helps us as teacher to help curate a bit of a limited collection of things from which those children can then make selection.
And by limiting, you're increasing success.
Yes.
Yep.
So that they can open many more books and go, all right, this is something I can get into, rather than opening a book and go, well, I know I can't read that, but I want to be able to read it. I can't. Like that's a frustration. That's really disempowering
Yep.
You lose a lot of confidence by being confronted with, all right, there's a whole library of books here and I can't find anything that... No, I mean, how long would it take to go through everything to find something? Too long. So this idea, and I think Max Kemp, I think probably only people our age will remember Max Kemp and the work he did. He talked about book selection strategies in his... I think his book was called Helping Children with Reading Difficulties. Yep. And that was a book selection strategy that he said, do you know what? Have a bundle of 15 books. Let a child then go through that 15 and make a choice from there.
Yep.
Now, as a teacher of older grade students, you know, when I had older grade students, I would do that. I would make these bundles of books. Came to library time when we were coming to select books, I would already have bundles of books made for my struggling readers. This was, you know, to begin them in the process. What I didn't do, which I now would do, and which I see all these very savvy teachers doing, is I wouldn't be making those bundles of books in the library and, you know, pulling out new ones every time. I'd be saying, let's take them all back to the classroom. And then there's a continued opportunity for you to keep looking through those books and, you know, finding things over time so that each week I wasn't pulling out, okay, what am I going to pull out this time? What are we, you know, that you want to make a bit of a collection and not just for one child, but, you know, amongst a few going, okay, there's a whole bunch of books here that I think could be really interesting for you. Like, that's honouring them, their interests and where they are, to be able to give them a more selected, curated range.
So just to clarify, I'm a little bit unsure, to clarify, your older way of doing it was to just go in and choose these books for a week, was it? And then... Yeah,
I felt for a start, and I think I did get myself out of it because I realised it was unproductive.
Yep.
You know, but my initial thing was I would go and, because Max Kemp talked about it being such a successful strategy, that I'd already have bundles of books. I didn't have them on tables. I had them set aside, you know, behind the library desk, saying, you know, James, I've got a bundle of books here for you to have a look through.
Oh, for each kid you were doing it?
Not for every child, for those who found it difficult to find books.
Right.
And this is one thing we did do in the school the other day, is for those children who knew which books they wanted to borrow from the library, we actually got them to say, who are you? How do you know which book you're going to borrow?
So they're sharing the strategy.
Yes. And they went, oh, well, I'm borrowing, true, you know, I'm borrowing another Enid Blyton book because I'm just so into her at the moment that I just want another Enid Blyton book, and I've worked through, you know, Famous Five, and I'm onto Mallory Towers books now. So, you know, but every child's then interested in that. I go, oh, that's interesting. And I'm hearing an author and then someone else says, well, I'm on Wings of Fire at the moment, so I want another Wings of Fire book. Someone else says, oh, well, I'm just at this point getting them to think about their novel choice, their choice of fiction book, not their informational book, because they also choose informational books as well, but it was about this fiction book strategy.
But your new way of doing it is what's the physical way of doing this, to going to the library with the children, the whole class, or what's your methodology?
Well, it depends whether you're a school who has, like, if you have a class library, like, that is a more limited range for me to help children find books in that collection because there's less to choose from.
Right.
And I would be doing that for my struggling readers. The way I'd be doing that is during a conference with children, I'm making sure that they've got, you know, a high success, just right book for them each time they finish a book. Let's help you with the next book to choose.
Yep.
Or early days, of that, I would do exactly that. I want to let the children who have difficulty choosing books and the children that I'm seeing who are struggling in their reading and aren't reading books with success, I'm going to be very intentional about sitting with them in a conference to help them get their next book.
And would you be selecting from the whole school library for that?
All right, if I'm in the classroom, we would go to our classroom collection to see if there's something we can find.
Start there first, yeah.
If I don't have a classroom library, I want to bring from the school library, I want to go with those children to the library, and that might be, if we've got a library slot, a time when I go in there. And so this is what we did the other day. We had teacher, I was an extra support, and there was also a teaching assistant in the room in the library. Between the three of us, we walked with the children who didn't know. We said, we don't want you to just grab a book off the shelf. We want to find, our job today is to find a book for you to read, to start, and to finish. So between three of us, we might have had 2 children each, and we made sure we found a book with them.
Yeah, that's important.
With them. And so it was lots of talk. It was lots of what interests you, what type of book, what have you tried that's worked, what have you... So someone would say, well, I did try a graphic novel once and that worked well for me. Is it okay? Of course it's okay to have another graphic novel. There's this questioning in children's minds about,
is it a real book?
Yeah, and is it okay to have that? Like, that's something interesting that I always find is what children think is the thing that they should be choosing, or what is it okay to choose?
So they're asking for permission.
They are asking for permission. And it's that, we call about, the checking for traffic syndrome. They check in with you all the time. Oh, am I allowed to have that? Or, or they'll open a book and see that it might have some illustrations in it, and they'll go, oh, no, that's what, and we'll ask the question, why not that one? They go, oh, because it looks like it might be for younger readers. And we'll go, oh, I don't think any illustrator, let's reassure them. An illustrator isn't putting illustrations in there to support age. They're putting them there to enhance the story, to give detail in illustrations that doesn't appear in the story.
So that's okay to be at this asking for permission stage, but we want to get them into the trial and error stage where they just have a go at it themselves, don't we? But are wise having a go.
Yeah, not just have a go and not be able to read it, because that's not good enough.
No.
But to look at a book and you see, a lot of our struggling readers, there's 2 categories that our students fall into. There are those who don't know how to choose books because they're just not interested in reading.
Yep.
They can read, but they're just not interested.
And sometimes just not comprehending well.
Yeah. Or haven't actually ever felt the success of starting and finishing a book.
Yep.
Right, so there's all of this. So they're the children who aren't motivated to read. Now, that's a different, helping them find the book to really engage them is a different scenario than if I'm helping a child to find a book who may have lost a lot of motivation because they can't find a book at their reading ability. And they're the children who, because we want them to have books of 97% or more accuracy, word accuracy, they're the children who we'll say as teachers, I can't find them. Where do I find the books that they can read? You know, where do I find material for them without going to, and I'm going to say,
unsuitable,
a decodable, level or a leveled text that's at level 1, because that's where they're operating, but they're a year 4 child.
The topic doesn't interest them at all.
Well, and it's so then we've got another scenario here about how do we find text for these children to read.
So what do we do?
Yeah, so what do we do? There are an incredible range of texts out there, particularly picture books, that are written for older readers that don't necessarily have a lot of text in them, but are very accessible. So I'm thinking of one book in particular. For example, Chris Van Allsburg, The Z Was Zapped. So it is an alphabet book, an illustrated alphabet book for older readers. In fact, it's so clever. It's a production written in 26 acts. How clever. Theatre performance, 26 acts. Each letter of the alphabet is an act. And with each letter of the alphabet, it will have things like A was in an avalanche.
So this is really clever. It's stimulating the old child's mind, but it's so accessible being the alphabet to start with.
Yes. Heavily illustrated.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden, we're also then seeing, illustration doesn't equal baby book.
Yep.
There is complexity in this illustration that feeds into the development of really deep comprehension and thinking and thought about this text.
And we'll take a break there from part 3 of our podcast. We look forward to you joining us for part 4.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.